is based on nothing but lies. And Satan is the father of lies, okay?
It takes more faith to be an atheist than it does to believe in God.
Where's the evidence for evolution?
Sounds like we got some more learning to do. Hello, my paleontological pals, and welcome to the second part of my three-part Why I Don't Creation series. In these videos, I hope to give an overview of some of the evidence that supports the theory of evolution, as well as addressing some of the more often repeated criticisms from the creationist camp. In the last episode, we talked about the scientific method and radiometric dating, the latter establishing 4.54 billion years as the estimated age of our Earth. In today's episode, we're talking about rocks. Mostly of the sedimentary variety, and the fossils found within them. That's right, the dreaded fossil record. So without further ado, Why I Don't Creation, Part 2?
One of the biggest lies kids face in the textbooks is about the geologic column.
The Earth, like an onion, has many layers. Even what we think of as the outside layer, the crust, itself is comprised at the surface of still more layers. These outermost sections are what we will be talking about. They are formed mostly of sedimentary rock. Sedimentary rocks are generally layers of deposited minerals or rock fragments that are formed when loosened materials are moved from one area to another by one of several means. The ways in which sediment is deposited can vary from glacial movement, to wind, to moving water, and even mud flows, just to name a few. Once the layer is deposited in its new home, the sediment settles into a stratum and may begin the long process of hardening into one of the many types of sedimentary rock, which is generally dictated by the minerals present, such as sandstone layers being formed mostly of sand, and mudrock being formed primarily by mud, and conglomerate and breccias by various types of gravel. The same pattern of deposit then solidification holds true for most of the formed strata of sediment. Our understanding of the basics of this process date back to at least the 1600s, when Danish scientist Nicholas Steno was given credit for the law of superposition. This geological law states that, at the time when any given stratum was being formed, all the matter resting upon it was fluid, and therefore, at the time when the lower stratum was being formed, none of the upper strata existed. The law of superposition was just one of several such laws proposed by Steno that would eventually form the basis of modern stratigraphy. James Hutton, in his 1785 theory of the Earth, furthered the understanding of stratiformation by proposing that the Earth's core was not only hot, but that it was also responsible for creating new rock, as well as surmising that heat was an integral part of the hardening of sediment deposits. By the 18th century, keen geologists started noticing a pattern between certain sediments and the fossilized remains being found within them. Seeing the correlation between certain fossils being found in certain layers and a consistent relationship to other fossils and layers, led some geologists like William Smith and his nephew John Phillips to attempt to organize and classify sedimentary strata by apparent age. The fossils used in this way, known as index fossils, are still a valuable tool for dating sediment layers, with some of the more easily identifiable index fossils having known upper and lower limits to the age range where we would expect to find them, such as the Palaeozoics, a genus of trilobites found only in the mid-Cambrian layer of sediment, a layer we now think to be representative of a period of around 500 million years ago. Using a mixture of dating techniques, like our old friend radiometric dating, as well as index fossils, we arrive at a fairly reliable geological timescale that shares many of its time period nomenclature directly with sedimentary rock layers representative of those time periods. Now, for the fossil record. Sometimes, when sedimentary rock layers are formed in the way we previously described, organisms or their remains can be buried in such a way that preserves them against the effects of weathering or other deleterious processes. When the specific criteria are met for this kind of preservation to happen, the end result might be a fossil. Fossils range from small to very large and can be direct remains or cast-like impressions left by ancient organisms in the sediment where they were buried. If only every organism was kind enough and lucky enough to die this way, then there would be no missing links for creationists to complain about. Unfortunately, that is not the case, and it would be rather silly to assume that we will find even trace remains of more than a small fraction of the life that once dominated this planet. Soft tissue decays quickly. Some environments are more likely to experience sedimentation, and the very act of getting to some of these potential fossils is a monumental task because many are buried deep within the Earth. What we do have are millions of remains from hundreds of thousands of different species of organisms, from a plethora of remote time periods, which is what we mean when we talk about the fossil record. The parts of the fossil record we are most concerned with in this video are transitional fossils. That is, fossils that display traits of both preceding ancestral forms as well as later derivative forms, the latter usually having pronounced physiological differences from the former. An often cited example of this is Archaeopteryx. While not being linked directly to any living species, Archaeopteryx, as first discovered in 1861, shares many traits with both ancient dinosaurs and modern birds. In fact, this 150 million year old specimen may be a distant cousin of one of the lineages that have survived into modernity as avians. At the very least, it gives us a good example of what an adaptation for feathered flight might look like as originating in a saurian descendant. Many other transitional fossils have also been discovered, some with more traceable lineages, such as Odontochelys forming a clear transition from a Papachelis-like reptile, and later more obvious turtle ancestors like Progonochelys. The importance is not whether these fossils, or others such as those of Hyracotherium, are direct ancestors of modern animals, like horses or rhinos in Hyracotherium's case, but that those fossils can show how branches between those kinds of animals would evolve. It could be that Hyracotherium, as with other transitional fossils, represents an evolutionary dead end on the evolutionary tree, but a branch that still shares some similar traits with lineages that continued on after it. Or it could be that these transitional fossils share more recent common ancestry and a similar evolutionary journey with species that we see later in the fossil record. This last idea can be seen in parallel evolution, such as when different organisms evolve similar traits independently of each other. This type of evolution is not uncommon and illustrates what mechanisms of adaptation nature has at its disposal. If a trait can be successful in a population under a certain condition, it may be reasonable to expect that it would surface in another population under similar conditions. In this way, we can look at transition fossils as somewhat resembling proof of concepts, as opposed to necessarily being sequential models of an organism's development. But thanks to the many transition fossils found, we see the time periods where certain noticeable changes in life took place, such as the emergence of cephalopods nearly 300 million years ago, the transition of some fish to tetrapods starting nearly 400 million years ago, the transition of small reptiles to early mammals over 200 million years ago, and animals like the Palaeozoic giving rise to what we know as whales over the past 50 million years. The fact that we find so many fossils all along the spectrum in the case of many of these transitions supports the gradual effects of evolution. The fact that we see no whales 100 million years ago frozen in sediment, or mammals 300 million years ago, would also seem to indicate evolution, a theory much more likely to explain absent creatures in the distant past than the sudden springing up of fully formed organisms. Some of the criticisms of the fossil record, levied against us, the terrible evolutionists, are as ridiculous as they are persistent. One is that the fossil record is incomplete, that there are too many gaps to form a complete picture or a complete theory. And admittedly, the fossil record is incomplete, as I mentioned earlier, and is very unlikely to ever be complete enough to satisfy ardent creationists. However, one does not have to have every piece of a puzzle to notice an appreciable pattern. In the fossil record, evolution is that pattern. Another often recited bit of insanity suggests that a global flood could be responsible for the layers of sediment and even the order in which we find fossils buried in the fossil record. This claim is laughable. It would indicate that sediment was laid down quickly and that all fossils of organisms found within died within a short period of time. Besides the obvious problem of why only certain varieties of organisms are found consistently at certain levels of sediment, such as the dinosaurs never being found beyond the KT boundary, a thin layer of sediment that is most likely indicative of a mass extinction event caused by an asteroid impact, and the fact that all known species, and in fact every individual organism present in the fossil record, would have been coexisting on this planet at the same time. Another problem with the flood model would be carbonite hard grounds in the sedimentary strata, which indicate long periods of sedimentary hiatus, as they are basically exposed lithified seafloors. These lengthy and often repeated cycles of time with no new sediment forming would seem to be in stark contrast with the creationist claims of a quick worldwide flood. There are more things wrong with the flood model than I could possibly fit into this video. In fact, I would have to do a whole new series on how evidence doesn't support just that one creationist claim. Maybe later though. But wherever scientific research and investigation turn up likely answers or explanations, and those explanations disagree with people's preferred worldview, we can expect a measure of mental gymnastics to keep the matrix running smooth. In the end, I simply hope to explain the evidence the way that I view it, and in so doing, maybe help others understand what they believe and why they believe it. If we don't start with evidence, then we're starting on the wrong foot. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hopefully you will come back next episode when we get into some talk about genetics and the theory of evolution. Finally. And as always, make sure you have yourselves a science-tastic day.